Well, good morning, everyone. I'm John Berger. I'm the Executive Officer of the West Australian Alliance to End Homelessness. Welcome this morning. I'd like to particularly thank Marie Taylor for doing the welcome this morning, but I'd like to start with Nala Kadich, Noongar Mort, Kayan Kadik, Nidjabuja, and I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the original custodians on the land we meet. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders, both past, present and emerging, and also pay my respects to those Aboriginal people who are joining us today. Thank you. So this event is being held in person and on Zoom, and I welcome everyone both here present and those coming in via Zoom. Welcome. Ask you to just turn off your mobiles, and on those on Zoom, just make sure your microphones are switched off. For those present here, we have ladies and gents that are past the lifts. The men are to the right and the women are to the left. In case of an emergency, please follow instructions from platform staff who will guide us. Finally, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Fleetwood Australia and Beyond Bank, and we'll just have a short video.
Fleetwood Australia. Fleetwood is the only Australian-owned national modular manufacturer, building spaces for families and communities to thrive. Fleetwood Australia, serving Australian communities for over 50 years.
Okay, well, welcome to episode 2 or part 2 of today's morning. I'm going to introduce you to Professor Paul Flatto from the Centre for Social Impact at UWA. Paul's been a member of the Alliance since its inception and has been key to the work of the Alliance, particularly in terms of setting up the evaluation framework and collecting data and helping us monitor how we're tracking against our aspirations and our targets. Paul has extensive experience in working within the for-profit, social enterprises, government and industry and philanthropists. Paul has made significant contributions to the analysis of social and economic outcomes and social impact and the effectiveness of programs and interventions in housing, Indigenous housing, poverty, unemployment, homelessness, housing, and the assessment of social innovations. So Paul's going to talk us through the release of the latest update report, and then after he goes through those findings, we'll call on a number of people to join a panel up front. So thank you, and welcome Paul to the podium.
Great, thank you, John. And I'd also like to acknowledge that we're on Whadjuk Noongar land and pay my respects to the elders of this land. And also thank all of the people who spoke in that first session. That was a really great session, launch of Homelessness Week. So really good to be here and to now launch the End Homelessness Report for 2021. If you don't have a copy of the report, there's a few left over, just the last few. They're going to be collector's items now from now on. But Chantel, Chantel's just got her hand up, and if you do need a copy of the physical report, she has one. All of those on Zoom, I know there's literally nearly hundreds on Zoom, so all of those on Zoom, they will be sent a copy of the report. Probably you already have it right now. Okay, so we're going to look through the report and just understand what it's saying about homelessness in Western Australia. And so unfortunately, I do have to look around because, oh, good, excellent. I can see the slides right in front of me, so I won't look around to all the people in Zoom. Excellent work. So Homelessness Week 2021, and this is really important for us. It's during Homelessness Week that the strategy was launched, a really big event, and all of the work that has been done by the West Australian Alliance to End Homelessness. So, you know, a number of years ago, the Alliance started to put that focus on ending homelessness rather than managing homelessness, setting hard targets, and then doing measurement and evaluation around hard targets. This is fundamental. It's too easy to talk about some latest factor that influences outcomes and to move away from targets, but targets are really important. So we did release the dashboard, the 2021 dashboard a few weeks ago. That's also on the West Australian Alliance to End Homelessness website. You've got the dashboard, which against all our targets shows exactly where we're going. So in this particular report, we're going to talk more generally about the outcomes that we're seeing, but we're adding into this report a special deep dive into the Advanced to Zero data. And a shout out with Shannon's session coming up immediately after this. In fact, it's going to continue straight on. That Shannon and others working around the Zero project have been really important in that data. So we're going to do a deep dive into Advanced to Zero data. And in that data, we're looking at surveys being conducted since 2012 using what's called the VI SPDAT, which gives us a really rich understanding of people's experiences, but also what does the new by name list data tell us as well. And then we're going to give a little bit of a coverage to some of the great initiatives that we have here in Western Australia and give a bit of a context. So the West Australian government's strategy is the first significant strategy that we've seen since probably 2004, I would say. And it really fills a gap. So we know that the Rudd government, 2008, an unbelievably important time for Australian homelessness through the Australian government. After Rudd, everything went silent from the Australian government's perspective. And there wasn't too much happening from the WA government's perspective, but we're now seeing action. So we're very supportive of that. And we'll give a bit of a context. So it's only a few illustrations. There are so many other initiatives out there. You know, just to remind people of those other initiatives, for example, you know, all the work that Street Law has done around justice issues. Justice is fundamental in terms of homelessness. So huge number of great examples of work that's being done. So where does this fit? Where does the report fit? As you can see here, we start with the strategy, the West Australian Alliance to End Homelessness strategy. That created the framework within which we're working. At the measurement and evaluation level, we wrote the evaluation framework and then started producing the dashboards and the reports. So we are really following through on what's happening to homelessness outcomes in Western Australia. So you've got the dashboard, which was released a few weeks ago, and now today, the 2021 report. This is going to be a test for you after. You'll all have to do an exam on this, telling us all about the interlinkages between different elements of the homelessness system and what that means. So our evaluation framework is based on a complexity approach to homelessness, recognizing that yes, there are these big structural drivers such as poverty, housing supply. There are also other factors influencing outcomes. But then on top of that, where we go in terms of homelessness is also fundamentally related to the resources that we have and the extent to which we get issues of homelessness out there front and center. So it's a broad approach to what matters in terms of ending homelessness. Still to do, we still have right at the center lived experience measurement. Not advice, not co-design, but measurement. And that work is still to occur. So here are the targets that we've set for ourselves, the West Australian Alliance to End Homelessness. Overall homelessness being reduced by half to 2028. End of chronic rough sleeping, and I'll talk about that as we go along. Also to reduce the drivers into homelessness. That's poverty, that's unemployment, that's family and domestic violence, and so on. And also to make sure that our system is working well, that we have a connected up system. So let's look at the trends in homelessness in Western Australia as they currently appear for us. Now, here's some latest monthly data, and we're using different sources. So there's the Specialist Homelessness Services data, which is now being provided on a monthly basis. And as you can see here, during COVID, there was a reduction. That's probably related to a lack of service delivery during that time rather than any real change in homelessness. And then we've had an increase, and in part that's related to extra funding coming into the system. So the more funding you have, the more you can do. You can actually start seeing people you wouldn't have otherwise seen. So you've got to read the data fairly carefully, but there has been this rise in recent numbers in homelessness in terms of service delivery. Of course, we have the census and really important work that the census people are doing, and make sure that that's filled out next week. We have a continual I'd call it engagement with the ABS and the census around the fact that we would like to see the census do more, particularly around using long form and actually having one question. It would be great if we could have one question in the census on homelessness, but we don't. But work to do. Anyway, for the time being, support the census people because it's so fundamental that we get that number. Really important work. So good on you for doing that work. Let's just stop at this point, just have a quick look at this, what's called a Sankey diagram, transitions. This diagram is looking at all of those who start a support period in the homelessness service system from a point of homelessness. And what we're looking at is the extent to which they end that support period in homelessness or in housing. And as the system improves, what we would really like to see is a higher proportion of support periods ending out of homelessness and into housing. At the moment, the majority end where they start. If you're homeless at the beginning, you're homeless at the end. What we want to see, as you can see down in those last few slots, public community housing, private housing, it's about 30%. We want to see that number rise significantly over time. We want to see more people getting housing rather than returning to housing in the same state. This is a different perspective. Here, we want to see people in the same state at the end as when they first began, because this is about those who are housed and who are receiving support because they are at risk of homelessness, and we want to see them maintained in housing. And the number is much bigger, fortunately. So virtually not all, but a very high percentage of those who are at risk of homelessness stay housed through that support period. Great stuff. So very important as we move forward. So there's some numbers in terms of recent trends and where we're going in terms of transitions on homelessness. Here's the regional homelessness numbers from the census, and we include marginal housing as well. Marginal housing is not, in the census they include severely overcrowded, in the marginal housing they include overcrowded. In the marginal, they also include those who are in really marginal kind of housing. And so it's an interesting kind of picture on that. And as you can see here, the regions have very high numbers, actual high numbers. And the rate of homelessness in the regions, particularly up north and in areas such as the goldfields, the rate of homelessness is much higher than in Perth. You will see, obviously, in terms of the Perth inner area, a much higher rate of actual homelessness as against marginal housing, and also you'll see much higher rates of rough sleeping in inner Perth. But if we are to end homelessness, it is about the whole of Western Australia, and it is about all forms of homelessness. That's the key point here. Aboriginal homelessness has continued to rise recently. Again, we saw with COVID a reduction, but then a rise. And this is the proportions, and we're still looking at very high proportions in terms of the service system. What we have seen with the WA strategy is a greater focus on Aboriginal-led and controlled organisations supporting Aboriginal people in terms of homelessness. So that's important going forward. Now, that's the current trends. So just a quick snapshot of current trends. If you want to look more into where we're at against our dashboard and against our targets, go to Dashboard 2021 for the West Australian Alliance to End Homelessness, because it gives you a much more complete description about trends in homelessness in terms of the dashboard. Let's now look at this deep dive on Advanced to Zero data. And this is about the data from 2012 to 2021. And what it gives us is a really good understanding about the group of people who are in that data set. And here we're talking about people who completed the vulnerability index SPDAT, as well as those who may have come into the system in terms of the data, just in terms of the by name list. And others we have both. We have both sets of data. So the by name list is really important, a great addition to homelessness data as we continue on. But what we see in terms of the Advanced to Zero, and this is very, very focused on rough sleeping, but not only rough sleeping. So it's focused around, traditionally until very recently, inner Perth, inner Fremantle, and has a focus around the experience of rough sleeping. Very high acuity levels in terms of risk factors. The origins of the VI SPDAT were in the medical world, and we do have to be a bit careful because that medical world was looking at risk from the point of view of mortality risk, which is critical, obviously. So we need programs to support those with chronic illness. And you can see through all of this data, the incredibly high rates of chronic illness and problems, brain injury or head trauma, really very, very high. And then heart, stroke, exhaustion, other kind of infections, asthma and so on, hepatitis C. These are high rates relative to the Australian population, much higher than the Australian population right across the board. One thing we do want to watch out for, though, is that in focusing on the health risk factors for mortality, we do need to be very careful that we also focus simply on chronic homelessness, long periods of homelessness. It's a really important point for us going forward. So here's some more stats in terms of risk factors on homelessness. And you'll forgive me for putting my glasses on, but I need to see. One of the interesting things when the VI SPDAT increased its coverage, and this is very recent, is the increased focus on mental health, which was one of the gaps from the past. And there you can see reported diagnoses, 34.4% taken to hospital against their will for mental health reasons, a very, very high number, showing that high level of acuity in terms of mental health issues. 30.2% reported PTSD diagnosis. When we started our work 15, 20 years ago, and we were asking those sort of questions on reported PTSD, diagnosis of PTSD, the numbers in terms of diagnosed PTSD in the chronic rough sleeping was about 1 or 2%. And then when we did the tests for PTSD, in terms of the surveys, we were getting up into 25, 30%. What that showed was there was a lack of diagnosis in that area for a long period of time. And it is recently that we have seen this transition, this transformation and understanding in this area. So there's a lot of evidence there in the Advanced to Zero data set around issues in terms of mental health, in terms of risk with alcohol and drug use, and treatment in that area, including 35% reporting blacking out. That's why there's a significant need for really strong, not only mental health supports, physical health supports, but also alcohol and drug related support. Hospitalizations are high, and service costs are very high as well. And One thing to remember, though, is that we tend to get into this kind of position where we focus on those who have gone to hospital and look at their costs, and we look at their outcomes, which is very important. And we see very high usage in that group. We also have a group, of course, who don't use the hospital system, and their service use is actually quite low. This is getting to the point to make sure that we understand the heterogeneity, that we realize that there are very different experiences out there. You can see here very low numbers in terms of, so 0 is the highest frequency. Make sure that you're really looking at that high degree of variation. And you look at the issues that people face. So we've seen these very high rates of chronic illness. We have repeated use of hospitals and emergency departments, and there we need focused health support. In other areas, it's about getting people straight into housing and looking at more social issues, or looking at justice issues like street law does. So it's fundamental that we do look at the experiences of people, which can be very differentiated as we move along. Here's another differentiated experience. 52% reporting that they have friends or family that take their money, borrow cigarettes, their drugs, etc. So we do see these other kinds of factors coming into life for those who are sleeping rough in particular. Now, let's have a look at the by name list. I won't talk about that too much, but the by name list data, 1,117 people in that data that we've got recorded, housed, which is an incredible effort in terms of homelessness services. And that's just in terms of that particular data. A significant number being permanently housed, a focus around public housing, community housing, and some in terms of private rental housing. If we have a look at the second diagram there, it's really interesting because it's looking at reported cumulative durations of homelessness. And it's looking at both the inflow into homelessness and the outflow from homelessness by duration category, homelessness duration category. And what is really significant here is that we get inflows, and some of those inflows are from housing back into homelessness. Some are new people that we see, and so on. And some of the outflows are people that we don't see again. But if this system is going to work well in the future, what we need to see is actually that we are able to permanently house, sustain housing for those with these long durations of homelessness going into years, and that we don't actually see a return to homelessness as much as we're seeing in terms of those who have long periods or long histories of homelessness. So we're clearly after a change in this graph, if you like, over time. And as we reported in the dashboard, we have average durations of homelessness, reported homelessness, self-reported homelessness that remain in the years. So it hasn't actually changed. It remains in the average as years, actual years of homelessness. So this is a big focus of the Alliance to change this story and to end chronic rough sleeping in WA. Now, let's finish off by looking at the current policy settings and progress in ending homelessness. And here we've, as I said, we've seen change. The WA government did some really good things in the past, but we're talking about going back a generation nearly. We're talking about the 2004, 2005 kind of period, the Homelessness Innovation Fund that started, if you like, ended up with 50 lives a few years later, Safe at Home, all of these great initiatives from that period. And then it goes silent. As I said, the Australian government with Rudd was absolutely tremendous. A really big focus in 2008 on ending homelessness, stopping movement into homelessness. How long did that last? Literally a couple of years. It didn't even last the full period of the Labor government. And then the new coalition government comes in and it's an immediate stop. So we've got to be really careful in this area. We've got a new, if you like, new wave occurring, and it's a very important new wave in terms of the WA government with an adoption of Housing First principles and significant investment that they've been making, no wrong doors, and potential around prevention and early intervention. I say potential because there's a lot more that needs to be done in that area. Announcements around social housing stock, but the issue for us, of course, is that the housing stock takes time. So we've got a gap in terms of this social housing stock in terms of coming on ground. We also have a gap in terms of common ground. So the initiatives are there, but we have actually a gap right now. No wrong door approach implemented. The Housing First Homelessness initiatives being funded. It will take time for these initiatives. What we want to see is not a, if you like, a return to what we've seen in the past with government, where you have this big surge and then silence. What we want to do is make sure that this surge continues on and on. And that means obviously getting into prevention and early intervention, getting into the regions, looking at youth homelessness and children's homelessness, family domestic violence, these sort of areas significantly going forward, because we got to turn off the tap. 50% of those who are adult homeless were homeless prior to the age of 18. It comes out in every stat that we ever do. If you don't turn off the tap in terms of childhood and youth homelessness, you don't change that number later on. And early onset occurs, you know, even amongst those less than 12, but early teenage years is a very, very common point for young people to find themselves homeless. They actually report themselves as homeless 2 years after they're actually homeless, typically. So there's this experience in the early teenage years that really we need to focus in on. So there's a lot happening, and there's a lot happening on the ground too. And you look at some of the interesting prevention stuff. So the link between, for example, out-of-home care and youth homelessness is extremely high. In terms of youth justice, most of the work that we've seen and done in terms of youth justice is almost one-for-one youth justice homelessness. In fact, one of the reasons why young people steal cars, not only to see, get a bit of a thrill, but they literally steal cars to have a place to sleep at night sometimes. So the connection is actually really quite strong. So we need to work more in that area. Going outside just the out-of-home care and the youth justice area, though, this more general group of young people. Housing First initiatives really strong, including in terms of Aboriginal controlled organisations going forward. Incredible range of good health initiatives, not all just focused on homelessness, but there is a big overlap, as Shannon will confirm, in terms of homelessness and those health initiatives. Entry Point is doing wonders because it's picking up a lot of people who would not necessarily be picked up in the service system. We need to do more in terms of supporting people into private rental accommodation from homelessness, as I said, and also maintaining them in housing. So rental support programs are really important going forward. Targeted initiatives in all sorts of other ways. You know, for example, we did some work on Zonta House, and the wraparound support there in Zonta House has been really incredible. Other initiatives like Crown & Co, and I think we've got, you can contribute, is that right? At the back there, John? Yeah, good. So social enterprise is so important as well. And people leaving prison, the connection between justice and homelessness, as I said before, is really big. And that's why we do really support street law and all the work that it's doing. This was just a little bit of a data snapshot from the Zonta House impact report that we wrote. And just to understand what this means, they run a number of programs, not just crisis accommodation, but support in other areas, including employment, etc. And this shows the transition of people from one interaction to another interaction to another interaction. So the first column is someone's first interaction with Zonta House, engagement number 1, and you have 0 exit, naturally, because you've engaged. You can't exit if you engage. That's it, just one, 0 to begin with, obviously. But then we go to engagement 2, it's 35.5%. In other words, we don't see 35.5% again. And then in engagement 3, we don't see 53.1% again. And then in engagement 4, we see 66.7%. So we go through, it goes like this: a third, half, 2/3, 3/4. Simple. Very simple maths on this. These second, third, fourth engagements are not so much about crisis accommodation, but they're about this wraparound support, giving people more, giving women greater support to enable them to sustain housing and safe housing. Interestingly, if you look at the family domestic violence data in the SHS, Specialist Homelessness Support area, it's problematic because often the support period or where they were housed prior to the support period was in permanent housing, but it was unsafe housing. So the data needs to be reinterpreted, obviously. And here's the importance of obviously doing this more longitudinal kind of evaluation that enables you to look at the same people across their different supports over time, longitudinal wraparound kind of evaluation. So for the future, what we say for the future, we need to get very strongly into the prevention, early intervention area. There is no question that we need to, if you like, build on this important work, which has been in the inner cities areas typically, and make sure we're getting out to the outer suburbs because that's where the new onsets occur. Invariably, they're occurring in the outer kind of areas and in regional towns and all the rest of it. So a huge amount of emphasis needs to be put on this unseen early onset kind of homelessness that you see, prevention around family domestic violence, greater work around out-of-home care, youth justice, but getting into schools. Schools is where the action is for homelessness in 15 years' time. So if you're not in schools, you won't stop the tap. Not stop the tap. What should I say about the tap? Turn off the tap. You won't turn off the tap. We need to get the Australian government back on board in terms of homelessness, and we need to look at governments committing to strict targets. Fundamental, the West Australian Alliance is there with strict targets, and it's saying we aren't at the moment tracking well in terms of our dashboard. You'll see that. And of course, we need to increase the social housing stock. Obviously, initiatives have come on board for that. But we need to look at the private sector much more, and in terms of private rental accommodation. So you'll see in your report the key messages that we've just explained. And so I'd like to finish there. Thank you for that chance to show the West Australian Alliance to End Homelessness Report. And we'll just have a panel, but with the panel, we'll then have questions from the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And there's a lot of information to digest, and obviously you're not going to take it all in, but the second part of this session really is for your opportunity to ask more in-depth questions on any aspect that was raised in the report. And Paul's going to moderate the Q&A, but I'm going to call now a number of people to join us at the back here to participate and respond to the questions that you will give. So I'll start with Anthea. Anthea is a Yamaji Warraji Noongar Yuit woman who was housed by the 50 Lives, 50 Homes program. Thank you, Anthea. Shannon is a research associate with the Centre for Social Impact and has done a lot of the data analysis that you've seen in this report. So welcome, Shannon. I'm going to ask Gail from Uniting WA, who's involved in the day services at Uniting. Thanks, Gail. Kate. Kate's from Centre Care. Come and join us. Kate works in the homelessness portfolio and a range of services across Centre Care. Thank you. And I think it's myself. There you go.
No.
Oh, Michael Pugh. Sorry.
Oh, no, Michael.
Yes, Michael.
Michael.
Come and join us, CEO of St. Pat's. Thank you, Michael. And now myself, I think. So we're going to need to use the microphone there, folks, and I'm going to give this over. So that the Zoom audience will also be able to ask questions.
Great. And so, yes, start thinking about those questions. We are going to take questions from our Zoom audience as well, from people here, physically here. But I'd like to begin with Anthea, if we could, Anthea. And thanks so much for joining the panel. And what I'd really love to hear is that experience, that you've gone into housing and you've had that positive experience in the 50 lives, but what your knowledge is around, what works and what has been important for you in that journey that you've had.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Anthea, and my experience has been homeless. My journey began at home, and my needs were neglected. There was no perseverance from family and no support. It was really difficult and challenging to become homeless because I grew up in a private home where I adjusted to a lifestyle that was educated and taught values and morals. And when I became homeless, I didn't know how to survive. All I knew is that I was really afraid. I came to Perth. I had a house up in Gelton, but I came to Perth because of legal issues. And down here, what I saw, my first night on the sleeping rough, I was really scared. I was really afraid, and I didn't know if I'm going to live or survive. All I knew is that I needed to make friends, and I knew that I was homeless, and what was going on for me was different from what was going on for a friend and so forth. So, I started to, all I knew is that I needed to just keep alive. I needed to go and visit my child. It was in the care of the family department, family protection services, and I needed to make sure that he was okay as well as myself. And then I started to build a network. I knew that the Department of Family Protection Services wanted me to do urine analysis. I needed to do that. I needed to address my drug and addiction and my alcoholism. And today I haven't used drugs or alcohol for 5 years. And part of that is seeing drug addiction and alcoholism raw on the streets of Perth to the homeless. It was an eye-opener. It was a friend that who's also homeless today that helped me and asked me if I want to do voluntary service at a rural centre. And I said, yes, okay. I believe that I'm alive today because of this person. And all I knew is that I had a career. I began a career up in Gelton as an artist in visual arts, and I was determined to continue my career. And I thought I'll get some voluntary work, and that way I've got something positive to look forward every day. I found a room. I rented a bedroom out, and that was scary. I didn't know this guy from Barra Soap. He let me rent a room out, and I got into the Street to Home program up at the Rural Centre. And I just, in my heart, I just knew that something's going to give and something's going to work, and it did eventually. I had just placed my faith in the Rural Centre, in the Street to Home program, and after hours care service, and the agencies that were provided to the homeless, Tramby and the Beacon and the places that I accessed to help and support me. And then I continued on my course, and eventually but at one stage in 2016, I hit rock bottom with my leg. I was diagnosed with melanoma cancer. That didn't stop me. I just knew that, you know, my boy, he's 12 today, but he's in a very loving environment. He's in a good place with beautiful people. And he says to me, "Mum, I want to come home." And all I knew is that little voice and them words in my head just echoed every day, that every step I took to stay alive and survive, and determined to get housing and continue on my career and get back up my feet and have the life that I think I deserve. You know, that's all that was worth it at the time. And today it's like, yeah, I just keep going. I built a strong network. I've done counselling to address my personal issues that happened as a child and growing up at home and what happened. Alcohol and drug counselling, I did that as well. I've become a member of Narcotics and Alcoholics Anonymous. I continue to seek support through this network and these people to overcome the difficulties and challenges, and and joined art groups and all this stuff that I had interest in. And to this day, I still try and, like the homeless people, like when I was doing voluntary at the Rural Centre, I got emotionally involved with these people. You know, they were like my family. They became my family. When I got my home, when I got into my home, I didn't know how to live there. I didn't know how. I went back out and camped on the streets on New Year's Eve because I needed to touch base with reality. Like, that wasn't real, you know. That was like I was in a fake world with all these fake people, and I didn't belong there. So I went back out there, and I thought in my heart, you know, this is God's will for me. This is what I need to do. I need to see what is happening here, what is really happening here. And even last week or two, I decided, you know, I need to go back out there. I need to go back out and help these people, because these people became my family, and they still are. Like, I can walk around in the city and not have a problem with them, and go home and think, oh, all my problems are there, all my bills, you know, like this career, all this stuff, you know. It's like, I don't know, and I got to. And the reality is, I look at my homeless friends and think, you know, this is them people. What if they try and change their lives? It's going to be really hard and challenging and difficult for them too, you know. But I wish them all the best, you know. I just pray that every day that God's with them, you know, and helping them and guiding them and making sure they're okay and safe, and getting the medical attention and the mental health access and all them services that are available to them. That's all I wish for them.
Yeah,
thank you.
Well, it's a very important story, and thanks for sharing. It takes a lot of guts to share. A lot of people who have had experiences aren't able to just yet share in the way that you've done, and that knowledge is really important. So thank you so much for that. Really important. So Shannon, I mean, your work, I suppose, is coming from the other angle, but you've been engaged in work around Advance to Zero. You've also seen stuff on, you know, if you like, the streets in terms of practical stuff. What is the research evaluation and your on-the-ground knowledge tell you about what's important in terms of transitioning to permanent housing and so on?
Yeah, I just want to say a big thank you for Anthea sharing her story. So I've been involved in the evaluation of the Housing First programs to date. So 50 Lives, 50 Homes, and 20 Lives, 20 Homes. And that's been over the last 5 or 6 years. And I think Anthea's really nailed the head on some of the themes that have actually come out in terms of our key findings, in terms of actually getting support once you're housed. And that can be a range of different supports, whatever it may be, whether that's the trauma counselling or the healthcare aspect, or engaging in activities such as art programs and things like that in a way to reduce isolation. Isolation's been a really big problem for people, especially where they've had 2 or 3 decades worth of homelessness. Their whole community may be rough sleeping, and they might be housed in a suburb they've never been to before. They've got no local connections to their community. And then maybe their only ongoing contact is their actual support provider. So part of that is actually integrating people into their communities so that they've got strong networks around them. another key thing that we found from the research side of things is actually where people have had choice over where they're housed, you're more likely to sustain your tenancy. So through 50 Lives, we've collected data on about 200 people that have been housed. Half of them were very purposefully allocated housing through the working groups in the program, and half were housed kind of by other means. So their name may have come up on the priority housing list, or they may have sourced their own private rental, or whatever it may be. And what actually we found is the people where real consideration was given to the property, where the individual person had a lot of choice over that. Yes, that's the suburb I want to live in, and that's who I want to live with, and I want to be close to a park, or I want a backyard because I've got a dog, etc. They were 90% more, 90% of people in that situation were sustaining their tenancies for a year, compared to about 70% where maybe it was just their allocation that came up. So kind of that wraparound support, linking in with services in their community, and some of that choice is probably the key things that have come out of the evaluation work to date.
Yeah, very important, the choice thing, and also building that in fundamentally into the by name list data. I know it's more data collection, but it actually really helps a lot. And if you do want a really detailed housing choice survey, we do have one all ready to go, which has yet to be accepted, but that's another matter. Anyway, that's really important. The other one, social isolation, loneliness. As you know, in one of the first Housing First programs in Sydney, the MISHA program back in the year following Rudd, if you like, where there was that housing supply that came on through community housing in Sydney with Rudd, loneliness actually increased in transition to housing. So why was that? Well, it was people who had networks on the streets were going into houses that they didn't have networks to. So if we got to make sure that that kind of connection is actually increased rather than decreased when someone goes into their home, so they feel at home. Really important stuff. Okay, so let's now turn to Gail and Kate in terms of the work that you're doing in services. And I know that you're working in different areas. Gail, a lot of work that you're doing with Uniting is in the inner city here in Perth, and you've had a long experience working in terms of rough sleeping and what works there and what are the barriers and so on. And Kate, around Entry Point in particular, but other programs in supporting people in housing. So maybe we start with you, Gail.
Sure. So I'm from Uniting WA, and really what we are focusing on is that chronic rough sleeping cohort. So Tramby, Street to Home and our accommodation services are a real part of what we do every day. So we're looking at people that have been chronically, rough sleeping for a long period of time. And I think, we all want to move towards housing. Housing is so important for everyone, but until we get that housing stock, what I've been really focusing on is interim solutions around safety and around keeping people sheltered somewhere safe off the streets to stop that further traumatisation. So, Uniting's been really I've kind of lost my filter now, I suppose, and just trying to do things. So we've really trying to look at what works, what doesn't work. And we've recently renovated the Tramby Centre to have more spaces to bring more specialised services and wraparound services in, looking at our accommodation. We just opened a interim solution accommodation on Monday for 30 people from Pioneer Park Ward Street initiative. So that's working with kind of people with very complicated issues and just trying to provide somewhere safe and supported. So when that house comes up for them, they've got that support network and we can really work on what will make them the most successful in that house. So from a Uniting point of view, that's really for the next couple of years, while these housing stops come online and these initiatives like Common Ground come online, it's looking at what can we do quickly, what can we do to support people, and how can we do it without building something purpose-built, because we don't want it. We only want it for the next couple of years until these housings pop up. This is about looking at innovative ways to use what we already have in a better way.
Yeah. Good. Fantastic. And Kate, maybe you could actually start with, I'll put you on the spot, talking about entry point.
Sure.
Because it's a slightly different world, isn't it? It's, but you are picking up people who would otherwise have not had any connection to the service system, but not all of them may be, if you like, had long experiences of homelessness, and how you develop programs that connect people into housing in a nuanced way, given people's differentiated backgrounds.
Sure. Majority of entry point clients tend to be families with children. So, and as Paul is saying, this year particularly, especially with the end of the moratorium, we've seen a lot of an increase in families in particular, but also singles who haven't been touched by the homelessness sector before. So they're often in private rental and have sustained those rental tenancies for a long time, often have had employment and had stability in their housing, and are now contacting the service because they're about to become homeless, or they have become homeless, and really don't know where to go. So Entry Point is essentially assessment and referral service. One of the things that we've done this year, we've just been successful fairly recently in a Lotteries West grant to enhance Entry Point with an 18-month brief intervention service. We're working with Paul and his team at CSI to evaluate that. So what we're aiming to do is provide short brief intervention for families in particular who haven't needed support previously to maintain their tenancy, to try and divert them away from the homelessness sector before they get entrenched in that system, as well as women who are experiencing domestic violence. The refuge service system has had a lot of pressure on it this year as well. It's harder to get into women's refuges. So we find that we've got women in purchased crisis accommodation for longer periods of time before they can access refuges. So it's about trying to get some timely support in at that, you know, when they're really vulnerable in a hotel room.
Yeah, good.
And and the evaluation will hopefully demonstrate that that can make a difference, and really about diverting people away from the system before we get in. Majority of Centrecare's homelessness services really do focus on earlier intervention and prevention of homelessness. Yeah,
and that very important thing of maintaining the housing, and those services are working really well. So. Not many people realise that, you know, almost close to half of the clients of the specialist homelessness service system are in fact those in housing. Interesting, paradoxically, we want to increase that number over time. So why paradoxically? Because we know that there are continued supports that are required over time. And if we can reduce the actual level of homelessness, support is still going to be there, but it's about maintaining those who are in housing and providing them with opportunities around employment and in other kinds of areas around support, social relationships in particular. So very important that we see that. And as we saw earlier in the Sankey transition diagrams, really good outcomes there. Michael, now, of course, St. Pat's does a lot of work on the ground in terms of rough sleeping and so on in Fremantle. But you've also had some really interesting kind of programs, not only the 20 Lives, but you're now looking at housing options, and you're dealing with this issue of how do we support and house people when we're still waiting for the increase in social housing to come on board. And you're doing things like working with the libraries, etc. So tell us a little bit about the practical world of running a agency like St. Pat's in this kind of environment where you don't have all the perfect solutions in terms of housing in place, but you've got to do something right now.
Look, I think it's a really challenging time, but dare I say it, an exciting time now as well, because What we have is a clear roadmap for the future, both in terms of the state strategy on homelessness, the 10-year strategy, but also the alliance strategy. We see investment starting to be delivered by the state government in key areas. But I guess also, you know, I know this is a well-worn phrase, but COVID has really challenged us to innovate and think differently. And in terms of housing first, we need to embark on a process of system reform. It's not only about delivering services on the ground, it's not about services, it's about a different way of doing things. So, you know, that's why I think it's exciting. But you're right, you know, we have this challenge because particularly because of COVID, we're in this unexpected situation where we've got a really tight, challenging housing market, and it's going to take a while for those long-term housing solutions to flow through. And there are people here and now today, you know, the last I looked at the by name list data around the 500 mark, they're about rough sleeping in the metro area. They're looking for a safe place to sleep tonight, and we need to address that. So we need to have different pieces of work happening in parallel. For us, other than our focus on Housing First, the 20 Lives, 20 Homes project, and now being part of the Housing First rollout in Perth and Rockingham, Mandurah, we're looking at the housing space, for example, and what we can do in terms of innovative solutions there. We're working with My Home on trying to get prefabricated models up and running that'll result in a quicker turnaround and more economic sort of solutions there. 20 Lives, 20 Homes, just to pick up on a comment earlier around housing choices, it's caused us to think differently about the stock we have now. So, for example, I think traditionally lodging house accommodation hasn't been seen as a fit in a housing first future, but we've found through 20 Lives, 20 Homes, that's not necessarily the case. That perhaps lodging, if it is a long-term secure place to live, actually is the choice of preference for some people and is a place where they can thrive in the long term. So I think there's a lot more to be learned there. Like Gail, though, I think we need to be realistic about dignified options for housing here and now. I think we need to look at the next 2 to 3 years and develop up some really good interim housing solutions that give people a really safe and dignified place to stay, whilst those longer term solutions come on board. The other quick comment I would make is on how we're reaching people. Particularly, we're seeing a lot of older people, a lot of women experiencing homelessness, people that are new into homelessness, and we're not necessarily reaching them through the traditional service delivery models. And so that's why we've developed with the City of Fremantle the Library Connect project in Fremantle. It's been incredibly successful. We're really proud of what we've achieved there in terms of reaching some of those cohorts of need that perhaps we aren't through traditional avenues. And actually it's developing into an early intervention model where we're diverting people quickly out of their pathway into homelessness.
Yeah, fantastic. Great work. Thanks, Michael. And John, we'll end with you before we go to questions from the audience and the audience. So John, take yourself back to 2018, the launch of the strategy, and you're here at the platform, and then we launch the strategy and you go onto the streets and you have thousands of people in different choirs and so on singing that particular symphony, huge representation, big agenda going forward. What have we seen in these last 3 years, number one, in terms of what progress we made and where do we still need to go going forward?
I think the thing that strikes us the most, I guess, is when we came together in 2018, or even before that actually, was tuning into the sentiment that we need to stop doing what we were doing and we need to end homelessness and not just respond and manage homelessness. And if there's one thing that we've achieved, I guess, is to change that whole narrative. And I think, you know, if I think now today, the conversations that we have and the people involved in those conversations, the general narrative is we must work towards ending homelessness, not just responding. So that's probably the biggest impact. I think the thing that what we've found is relationship and bringing people on board and connecting with people has been really key as well, and aligning people to our vision. So, you know, if we're talking about ending homelessness, behind that needs to be the evidence. And, you know, we've touched on some stories and some examples of, you know, what is the evidence that does create success and ends people's homelessness. So much of the work of the Alliance has been that alignment. And, you know, we've seen it in the mayoral race, you know, bringing the councillors in, the candidates, and saying to them, you know, we have a strategy, we have a way of ending homelessness. You don't have to create the solutions, just come on board. And if I think about all the groups that have come on board over the last couple of years, they're too many to count, really. And so that's been really important. It's important to get that alignment and get that consistency. I guess the other biggest thing has been the voice of lived experience. Key to everything that we've done has been we need to hear from those with lived experience. We can't do what we do unless we hear those stories. That is the evidence. That is the thing that drives why we need to do the things that we need to do. And so, yeah, that's been part of it. And I guess the final bit is then using that evidence to inform our decision making. And I think that's what Advance to Zero is all about. The evidence worldwide says is you look at what is the evidence telling you, use that evidence to inform your decisions. So if something works, great. Keep going at it, scale it up. If something doesn't work, stop and do something different. And that's just, it's as simple as that. And so what I've seen is more and more people coming together to look at the evidence and use that to inform their decisions. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Now we're going to have one question from the one question from the other audience. And this we'll do quickly. I did have, Eleanor's not here anymore. So Eleanor was the first one to put her hand up, but, oh.
You need the mic, Eleanor.
Microphone.
Thank you, Professor Flatter. That was fantastic, and all the speakers very thorough. And just scanning through the report, I think that this accelerated learning that documents like that create has a huge impact, because every single executive now in the homelessness space can open that up and go straight to what's the frontier of practice in WA and see everything that's happening, and then think, okay, what are the missing bits? So it's just reports like that are so important. My question is really just about supply, and everyone talked about the housing that's coming on stream in the next 2 to 3 years. Will that be enough, or do we need more coming on stream in the next 2 to 3 years as well? And secondly, what amount of the homelessness is just a question of inadequate supply, and what amount is really more about service delivery models and overcoming very entrenched situations that require massive wraparound and other care before homelessness becomes viable?
Yeah, so very quickly, housing supply, the initiatives are very significant, but it's over some periods of time, so it's really important to remember that. Actually needs a little bit more than what's been delivered, but here we actually need to see the federal government come in more. But on top of that, we do need initiatives in the private rental market and by private developers and so on. So that's where impact investing plays its part, very importantly, and innovative models around homelessness real estate agencies and so on. So there's a lot more that needs to be done there. Yeah.
I might just add to that. So again, using evidence. So the by name list tells us who has case management support and who doesn't. What's the percentage running at the moment? About 1/3 only have case support at the moment. So there's 2/3 people on the by name list that don't have consistent case support. So that has now become an accepted reality in terms of that's the situation and we need more resources in that space. And that has actually driven some of the key resource decisions within government to increase that through initiatives like HEART and the Housing First initiative as well, to ensure that we have more case support available to people, particularly on the street.
Fantastic. And a Zoom question, no Zoom question. Oh, very quiet. No doubt they're really intently reading the report as well. So that's all right. So instead of Zoom, we'll have one more question here. Yeah, your turn. You'll go.
Thank you very much. I'm Hope Alexander, and for 7 years I was in private rental with no lease. And when I asked my private landlady, she just said she was thinking about it. And I mean, what sort of answer is that? But my question is, what are we going to do about negative gearing? I believe the Labor people decided they weren't going to pursue their policy of getting rid of negative gearing. And a couple of years ago, it was reported that one politician in Canberra had 30 plus negative geared properties, which I think is absolutely obscene because they don't pay tax on these or whatever. And they're preventing young people or people wanting to buy properties. And these are the people who are becoming homeless. People trying to buy their own property, but the foreign investors and other investors are pushing the prices up so much that ordinary people in Australia can't buy their own home. So what are we going to do about it? I'm lobbying my local federal politician, but do I have to start a whole movement to get rid of negative gearing, or do I have to do it on my own? I'm a bit old for that, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. You might be doing a lot of this on your own at the moment with others who are, yeah, unfortunately, we have a situation where political parties now are very afraid of taking actions in this particular area. So that's an interesting one. So we do have that kind of political verb going on. Right, okay, so maybe we should finish there because Shannon needs to set up for the next session, which is going to start straight after this. So stick around, make sure you do what you need to do in the 1 or 2 minutes break.
Before we finish though, Paul, I'm just going to give a gift to all our panel members.
Fantastic, yeah. Oh, thank you very much. And yeah, just to make, I mean, I do follow the Olympics, and because Shannon is doing the next session, she will be the only multiple winner. So,
so yes, the next session
watch out for that.
The next session is called Messy Data, and it's time to delve into the data. So we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll reconvene.
Can I just get everyone quickly for a group photo, please? Just down on the front here.
Yeah. Yeah, but maybe I should, I mean, can you see they're all right there?
Oh, yes. We don't need to have your calendar set. That's calendars. How tired we are. You don't need to